to the SOAP video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are working our way through the book of Ephesians right now, and we've come to our third of 3 weeks.
Right.
Almost done. We're in the last two chapters, chapters 5 and 6.
Right?
Yep. And great book. We've had a lot of fun the last couple of weeks with it. A lot of good stuff in here.
Right, and 5 and 6 the same way. A lot of stuff that should be familiar to people, too.
Yeah, definitely some things in here that people are going to remember or recognize.
Yeah, so like always, we're kind of trying to point out some things that, or at least that I find odd or different, and things to talk through, but obviously we can't get real deep into everything.
Right, but, some highlights and some things that we find interesting or something along those lines.
Well, I'm going to just kick it right off.
Go for it.
All right, so in chapter 5, Paul says, be an imitator of God. And for whatever reason, that phrase kind of hit me, imitate God. So I, Googled it online, and of course there's sermons and, just an incredible amount of information like there is about everything else,
right?
Which I'm sure is all 100% correct.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
By the way, but what was hitting me was in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, "Be an imitator of me."
Right.
Paul.
Right.
And in other places, or Philippians, at least twice it says. I guess he says, "Be an imitator of Paul." I was thinking at some place he also said, "Be an imitator of Jesus." So he's used this "be an imitator of."
A couple of different times.
Yeah, but the different thing is with this one is of God.
Yeah.
So why God this time?
Well, I think so. You see, be an imitator of me, be an imitator of God, and right in the middle in 1 Corinthians it says, "Be an imitator of me as I am of Christ." So that's how it links it together. So he's just, it's. When you bring them together, you get the full picture, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we had talked before, and you said, at least for the 1 Corinthians one, that they were so far away from Christ, they were so far away from God, that Paul's just like, just imitate me, just do what I do,
right? Yeah.
And we'll get you there.
Well, and here, don't forget, chapter breaks are arbitrary,
right?
Basically. So if we just take the big fat 5 and, get it off of there, what did he just say in chapter 4, verse 32? Be kind to one another, compassionate, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ forgave you. So be imitators of God.
Nice. So
that's the...
Yeah. Well, then he continues in 5, even saying how to be an imitator of God, even though, he had already said it, but he says, live in love.
Yeah.
And love is a big theme in here.
All the way through.
Yeah,
exactly. All the way through, yeah. And you've pointed out, the connection to Revelation 2, to the church at Ephesus. You've lost your first love. We keep coming back to that because
So it certainly does seem that Paul at least saw that it either was happening or it had the possibility of happening.
Right.
And then again, of course, John, 20 years later, it definitely happened.
There it is. Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, in chapter 5, verse 9, it talks about the fruit of the light.
Yeah. Right,
a little place, not fruit of the Spirit, fruit of the light.
Yeah.
And it talks about goodness, righteousness, truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to God. And I like that, trying to learn.
Yep.
Right, so there's an emphasis on, like we say, we don't know everything about God. And things get revealed to even us as we learn more about Him, as we study more.
Right.
And that's part of our job, trying to learn what's pleasing to God.
Well, and let's not forget, this is part of we'll call it the practical section. Chapters 1 through 3 are heavily doctrinal, 4, 5, and 6 are heavily practical. So it's living out, the doctrine that he talked about in the first 3 chapters. Right. Here he's using this theme, and it'll follow through actually into chapter 6 as well. This theme of you were in darkness, which sort of picks up from chapter 2. You were without God, without hope in this world. Now you're in the light, so live like it.
Yeah. And speaking of that, it even then goes into now not living in the dark, but
exposing
the
the
darkness.
deeds of the darkness. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a totally different thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also kind of cool.
You know, it's interesting because the temptation is to withdraw from the darkness.
Right, just ignore it. Just
right, create our own little. In fact, I got an email from a place that a thing that I do online, and they're like, we are working on creating our own parallel Christian community, parallel Christian economy, parallel Christian society on, because the world is, and they're not using these exact words, but the world is getting dark.
Right.
And so basically they're saying, let's just withdraw from the world and live over here.
Yeah.
Which,
well, Amish. There's some examples.
Well, even in the Old Testament, we've been in some of the Old Testament books, and as the Northern Kingdom got worse and worse, right, the good people who were there,
just
moved south. Yeah, which forces the speeds it up. Right. Same thing. The church is not going to fix the world. We're not going to fix society. So where's the balance between withdrawing from society altogether, boycotts, and I'm not going to give my money to these places, and I'm not going to buy, and I'm not going to do whatever, and
isolation.
Yeah, and exposing exposing the darkness as darkness. There's that balance, and it takes wisdom.
Well, and it says live wisely. Yeah.
It takes wisdom to determine how that
exactly
that balance.
And that's the key, right? In order to have wisdom is applied knowledge.
Yep.
Really. So you have to have the knowledge. You have to know when to apply it.
Yep.
Yeah. But we're being asked to live in the world, but not be of the world.
Right.
But living in the world is tough, or can be tough.
And it's getting. Let's be honest. It's getting tougher.
Right.
In our current society,
especially where we're at.
Right. Yeah, where we're
especially
at right now.
In the U.S. too.
It's getting more difficult.
No, I just meant in our lifetime.
Yeah.
We had it pretty cushy for quite some
There's
time.
no doubt. Yeah, there's no doubt. But Paul said that things will get worse. So we're seeing them get a little bit worse. Will they get better in the future before they get worse again? Maybe.
Yeah.
We don't know. But right now, there's a lot of concern about how we navigate some of these, these policies and these things that are coming up.
Right.
Be careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, which is what you pointed out in verse 15, taking advantage of every opportunity because the days are evil. Even back then, Paul knew the days are evil, so you've got to make the most of the opportunities that you do have.
Yeah.
But you got to do it with wisdom.
Right. Then there's a whole section on households.
Yeah, but before we get there,
okay,
because there's a bridge that connects living wisely with the section on households.
Okay,
and that is verse 18. Do not get drunk with wine, or starts with verse 18. Do not get drunk with wine, which is debauchery, but be filled by the Spirit. And then the next three verses are, how are we filled? What does being filled by the Spirit look like? Speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing, making music in your hearts to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. These are examples of living in the Spirit, right?
Nice.
Now, that last line in 21 is submitting to one another in mutual reverence, or out of mutually submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he gives 4 examples of
submission.
So
the first one: wives, submit to your husband.
Yep.
As he submits to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are submitting to their parents.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's only 3, isn't it? It's not 4. So there's the husband and wife relationship. He gives there's the children and parent relationship,
right,
and then there's the slave and master relationship.
Right.
So 3. I said 4. It's 3. So 3 examples of living in mutual. In a sense, mutual submission. Husbands and wives submitting to one another with different roles. Parents and children submitting to one another in the Lord, but with different roles of authority.
Right.
And slaves and masters submitting to one another with different authority roles. which, by the way, that also means the husbands and wives are different authority roles, all three of them, right?
Right.
We see the parallel. Some people are going to look at this, hold on a second, I'm not seeing mutual submission here. The parallel is in Colossians 3, where he does bring out that other side a little bit more.
Yeah. So, so like I said, this is one of those areas that I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on. We have in the past, but certainly if you just read, wives submit to your husband, and you stop right there, you get an incomplete picture.
But that's what it says. There's the text right there.
Yep. I do like the part where it says, "Fathers, don't provoke your children to anger."
Yep.
It doesn't say so. Moms, you.
Feel free.
Feel free.
That's right.
But I do think that dads, being a father, provoking my kids, there's an unintentional part too, where you want the expectations are too high, and you want that perfection that is not going to happen.
Well, there's also, it doesn't say mothers raise your children in the instruction of the Lord either. It's father. Ultimately, fathers have the when they stand before God, the fathers, how did you lead your family? And that includes how did you lead your wife and how did you lead your children? And so, it does come on us,
right,
a little bit stronger.
I also like the slave and master from the aspect of, on the master part, there's just a little line in there that says, hey, remember, you all have the same master in heaven.
Yep.
Right? So you may be master on earth now, but you're going to have a master when you're in heaven.
Yeah.
So,
well, we even do. Even if there is a master or an employer, if some people want to make this employer-employee type thing, if you're an employer, you don't even have to wait till heaven. Today you have a master. I mean, ideally, if you're walking the path, then you have a master. Right? So do you want your master treating you the way you treat your...
Right.
Or
your kids, or your spouse.
Yeah, any of these, right? Yeah, and that's the key. Love your wife as Christ loved the church. Okay. How does it's love all the way through. So how does God love?
Right. Yeah.
All the way through. Yeah.
Right.
Like we said, this whole section.
And then we jumped into chapter 6 in there too.
Yeah, that just sort
of really just kind of moves in.
Well, again, you take your big eraser and you erase the 6, and it's like, hey, look at that, it all fits together.
So then we get to the armor of God,
Yep.
Which is in chapter 6.
Famous section.
Yeah, always shows up, especially Treehouse Kids. Always shows up in youth group. The armor of God, and I'm positive we have armor of God in the storeroom here too.
Probably.
Where we have a sword, and you have to know what all this is for. But why do we need this armor of God? And we're told why, right? To be able to stand against the devil.
Yeah, it's defensive.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't look, but the net has the word stand up, stand, at least 3, if not 4 or 5 times in there.
Yep.
Almost like it's trying to make a point to, you need to be physically able to stand up to the devil.
Yeah. And
I don't know if they intended it. I think it's more that way, right?
Stand your ground,
Right.
So this is not offensive. A lot of people want to make this offensive, storm the gates of hell, whatever.
Right.
It's defensive. Okay, so stand your ground means, you're not necessarily running forward, but you're also not turning tail running backward.
Right.
But it's also, and everybody knows this because this is the words on the page, but a lot of people don't think about it. A lot of people will think about, this is my armor, I'm supposed to put it on every morning, put on Christian's armor.
Yep.
Except that's not what it says.
Yeah, whose armor is it?
Whose armor is it? It's God's armor.
Right. So is this something, as a Christian, we put on once? Or is this something that when the devil is doing his devilish schemes, we need to recognize it, put on our armor then?
I think put on sort of throws off the sense, because we think about, now I'm going to put this piece on, I'm going to put this piece on. The thing is, helmet of salvation, for instance, is the one that is the key. In Isaiah, Paul's quoting Isaiah here, The helmet of salvation is God's helmet that he puts on himself when he goes to war. So this isn't me putting on a helmet. This is actually God's armor. God wears his armor, and the way I put it on is by submitting to him. If we go to James 4, we find submit to God, then resist the devil and he'll flee from you. Right? First we submit, then we can resist. Right? If I'm standing there thinking, I've got all this armor on, it always reminds me of David when he was getting ready to fight Goliath.
Yeah, and he put on Saul's armor.
Yeah, King Saul is like, here, put on my armor. And the kid could barely stand up.
Right.
He's like, yeah, this isn't going to work. I'm going to do what I'm. It's the same thing. You know, if this is a sword that God wields, if this is a armor that God wears, how am I supposed to?
Yeah, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah. So, we've got to be careful with the other thing that's interesting is, this is not the only place we find the armor of God. We go to Romans 14:15. And he switches up some of the illustrations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's not like it's this firm, fixed, every piece in its place. It's just an illustration, and when he used the illustration somewhere else, he mixed it up a little bit. It's not as big of a deal as some people try to make it. The bigger point is, God is fighting for us. It's a spiritual battle. We can't even see. I mean, how am I supposed? I can't see. It's not against flesh and blood.
Yeah. Yeah. In there also it says on that day.
Yeah.
So is that a future day? Is that not that it's a throwaway?
No,
thing,
I think it's the day whenever we're facing these
Okay.
things. Whenever we're facing these things, Satan's throwing his darts, or whatever. We're under attack. How do we stand firm? At least in my opinion, we submit to God and then we resist the devil and let God fight our battles for us.
Yeah. One of the commentaries that I read talked about the demonic activity that was happening at this time when Paul was in Ephesus.
Yeah.
And it's in Acts chapter 19, and it's the part where somebody is I think the Jewish leaders are talking to an evil spirit, and the spirit says, I know about Jesus, I'm acquainted with Paul, but who are you? Just, that whole conversation is like, good time to have your spiritual gear on.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole concept, because if I think that I can just put on the armor and go rebuke Satan or whatever, that's the type of response. He's like, yeah, who are you again?
Yeah.
But if I'm submitting to God and he's fighting my battles, 1 John says, and this is the victory that overcomes the world, our faith. The one who has faith has victory. So it's not that we're out there doing battle with whatever. It's we're submitting to God, we're living in faith, we're walking wisely, doing all of this other stuff in context. Again, not taking this out of context and making it a thing, but when we're doing all of this together, then we find out that God fights our battles, we're living in faith, we're walking in the Spirit, we're doing all this stuff, and we find victory.
Good. So we get to the end of chapter 6. There's an uncharacteristically short farewell, I think. I don't believe there's any names in there. Usually there's a list of names that, tell hi, say hi to this people.
Yep.
Maybe the guy who took
the guy
right?
who's just the guy who's carrying it, yeah.
T.
Yeah, Tychicus, yeah.
Tychicus.
Yep. I've sent him, so that you guys know how I'm doing. Who are you guys?
But it almost seemed like he had some secret things he was going to say too.
Yeah.
He has some more information on how I'm doing.
Yeah. I'm not going to put this in my email, but when I see you, right? And then the last verse, and I know I brought this up a couple of weeks ago. Grace be with all those who love our Lord Jesus Christ with an undying love. There's that theme again. And then 30 years later, they didn't love the Lord with an undying love, and Jesus said, "You've lost your first love. You've left your first love."
Right.
So that's a huge warning to us too.
Yeah. Don't rest on your laurels. Things can change. It all started with false teachers that came in.
Yep. Yep.
So we've seen over and over again in various books of the New Testament, fight against those false teachers.
Yep.
Those that aren't teaching the right doctrine.
And there's two ways to fight against false teachers. Number one, make sure that you are in sound doctrine, sound teaching and study, and you vet who you let teach.
Right.
Right? We do that here.
Right.
We don't just let anybody stand up with a microphone, not because we want to be exclusivist or stingy, but we have a responsibility for the people that are in our care right now.
Right. Yeah, so good. Good.
So,
good book.
Yeah, excellent book. Not nearly enough time in it.
Yeah.
We'll be back, I'm sure, one of these days.
He controls the reading, so he could have made it as long as he wanted.
Yeah, well. That brings us to the end of Ephesians. I hope that it was beneficial to you. I hope that you have learned some things, that you really spent some time meditating over some of the doctrinal and the practical side of this letter. Next time, we'll start a new book. But until then, feel free to share this, send in your comments and your questions, and we'll see you back here next time.
Bye, everybody.